So if you find yourself both repulsed by and at once inexorably addicted to social media, and inexorably is a hard word to pronounce, and if you find yourself doom scrolling on issues related to the state of the nation or our politics or COVID, and you're wondering, what role does social media play and what can you do? Then definitely stick around, because given the work that I do, I often get asked that question: is social media to blame for polarization? I'm Bob Bordone. I'm co-founder and principal of the Cambridge Negotiation Institute. I'm a senior fellow at Harvard Law School, where I also founded the school's negotiation and mediation clinical program. And in this video, I'm going to discuss the question of whether social media is to blame for political polarization. Then I'm going to offer 5 concrete actions you can take now to be a positive force for dialogue, exchange, and, believe it or not, decency on social media. So let me be clear, social media is not to blame for polarization, but it does contribute, and sadly it exacerbates a set of dynamics that are already really in play. So I've already discussed some of the dynamics in play with respect to polarization in some of my other videos. Check them out to hear my thoughts on that. So let me explain a bit more on how social media makes things worse. First, Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, and yes, even amazing YouTube, have a very specific way of making money. They do it by getting you to spend more time on their platforms. You know what's the best way to get people to stay on a platform? To show them more and more things that they already like, and to show them more and more people with the ideas, reactions, thoughts, and preferences that are similar to their own. Turns out big tech companies have developed sophisticated algorithms that can detect your preferences in everything from music to movies to sport teams to politics to, yes, your very favorite negotiation nerd YouTubers. On the one hand, right, this is great for everyone. The more Facebook and Twitter and TikTok and YouTube find things that we like, the happier we are and the happier they are. The problem is that we start to get a one-sided view of reality, and that can get us into trouble. Now, in some ways, it's not so bad, right? Let me give you an example. My parents are in love with their golden retriever grand dog, my sweet little dog, Rosie. So if you take a look at my mom's Instagram feed, you would think it was a feed devoted almost entirely to golden retrievers. In fact, my mom sometimes thinks that everyone on the platform is seeing all dogs all the time, because to her, Instagram is a place for the cutest dogs in the world. And that's pretty harmless, right? But here's the thing, the algorithms can also get dangerous when we carry them over to politics or discussions around really complicated and contentious issues of the day. Suddenly, a misstatement from a political leader with whom I disagree gets amplified on Twitter, and everyone in my curated Twitterverse starts to develop a fixed and inflexible narrative about them. When we finally confront that narrative in the real world, we are already convinced that others' views are unhinged or wrong or evil, and so our polarization actually grows.
That's where you're wrong, baby girl.
But it's not just the algorithms that are problematic, because the second major way in which social media actually contributes to an increased polarization is the way that a site like a Twitter or a TikTok or a Facebook tends to amplify the loudest and the most extreme voices rather than the ones that are most nuanced or balanced. Influencers on social media want their posts to go viral, right? Because that's how you pick up followers and that's how you grow your influence or your platform. Years ago, one of my teaching assistants at Harvard Law School urged me to get on Twitter. I kept on resisting. I said, I don't understand this and I don't have time for it. But this student of mine persisted. I mean, he basically kept on saying, like,
if you want to make any difference in the world, you need to be on Twitter.
Now, for the record, I might question this argument, but at the same time, I thought, boy, this student is really a great negotiator.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
He knows that I'm less interested in being famous than I am in making a difference. So maybe I should get on Twitter.
Oh my God, fine.
So I finally get on, and then he says to me, like, just so you know, Bob, you need to have at least 1,000 followers to be anybody on Twitter. This, to me, seemed like a wholly impossible task. But later that year, I was in a conversation with someone who had thousands and thousands of followers, and I was telling them about my task to hopefully one day get 1,000 followers.
And she said to me, oh, Bob, this is really easy. Just say something totally extreme and outlandish, and then you'll get tons of retweets and you'll get a ton of followers. And
thinking, it's like this person wasn't kidding. Of course, I thought to myself, like, given the work that I do as like a mediator and dialogue person, I'm not sure this is really on brand for me. But their point was really well taken, because social media tends to reward extreme and sometimes polarizing comments. Thing is, in the political realm, this actually makes polarization even worse. Finally, quite apart from social media, it's just the case that our general media environment has become even more balkanized. So what do I mean by that? Well, not so long ago, like when I was a kid, which to be clear, was not so long ago, most of us got our news from a pretty limited range of sources. There were three major networks, there was CNN, and then there were some national newspapers like maybe the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and the Washington Post. And then most major cities had like one or two major newspapers, something like the Boston Globe in my city, or the Philadelphia Inquirer, or the Chicago Tribune. And that was basically it. But now there are dozens of media sources. But even more importantly, most of us actually just get our news from what our friends post on like Facebook or Twitter or TikTok or Instagram. And again, at one level, right, that seems like a good thing, right? We have more sources of news. It's not just a few elites telling us what's going on. But it hasn't always worked out to be good, because as these news outlets have proliferated, and as we get our news from more and more curated sources, the mainstream news outlets actually struggle to get eyeballs on what they're doing. So many major newspapers in cities just disappeared. And when a story goes viral on Twitter or Facebook, a once-a-day newspaper feels pretty irrelevant, pretty like 1980s. So what has happened is news outlets have also tried to curate very specific audiences. So we have OAN or CNN or Fox or MSNBC, and all of these have now taken on a more partisan slant to get more eyeballs watching them. The result, more polarization and more balkanization. So if this is depressing to you, I'm sorry, it's a little depressing to me as well. But it's not inevitable, because if our democracy is to thrive, we actually don't need to agree on what to do, but we have to have at least some shared idea of basic facts. So social media, or to be more precise, the way we use social media, can tend to erode trust so much that we often can't even agree on what has or is happening. The satire Netflix film Don't Look Up actually is starting to look more and more real these days. So I guess the question is, what can you do? And there are basically 5 steps you can take to moderate the influence of social media on polarization. The first of these is actually really simple. It's just limiting your use of social media. So our Surgeon General, Dr. Vivek Murthy, has actually shared research that has showed that misinformation and polarization on social media platforms is actually a serious public health concern. So the advice there is not stop using it, but moderate your use of it. Use it as a way to stay connected with friends and family, but also actually stay connected with friends and family. 2, work really hard to try to see news stories from sources other than your own social media feeds. So this actually takes some work and some intention, but not, frankly, a huge amount either. If you get most of your news from one side of a political fence, just commit to spending at least some time listening to the other side. So I do this in a number of ways. First, I've actually worked really hard to cultivate friendships on both sides of the political aisle. Now, to be frank, that has earned me some of the ire of people on my side of the political aisle, but I actually don't care about that. Once I have some friends on the other side of the political aisle in my social media universe, I actually pay extra attention to what they're posting, and I'll actually click through to read the articles or commentaries that they think are really important. Inevitably, I learn a lot. It tends to make me not always shift my view, but it almost always makes me change my understanding of how they've came to their view. And that's really valuable. The other thing is, when I teach, I often teach on partisan perception. And so I like to get some examples. And the way I do that is I'll literally look at a story on the Washington Post, which some of you may know is a more liberal news source. And then I'll go to the Washington Examiner and look at the way they're covering the very same story. But the other strategy I have for this, and this may be surprising to you, but if you actually look at the way international news covers the United States, it's a really nice way to get a different take on the story. So I love going to the BBC or the Guardian or the Economist because they kind of tend to take this more one step away view of what's happening in this country. Third, think about reaching out to those with whom you disagree. So sometimes when I've posted something on Twitter or Facebook and someone has disagreed, what I'll do is on a private channel, reach out to them. And I always start by thanking them for their response, and then asking them some curious questions. Say a little bit more about your conclusion, or I want to understand where you're coming from. Now, truth of the matter is sometimes I don't hear anything back. sometimes ideas on the back, and it's still belligerent or maybe even hurtful. But here's the really cool thing. Sometimes I get a response, and it's a response that actually starts a conversation. And usually doesn't shift the viewpoint, but it's learning. And it's somehow stopping or pausing that tendency to move into polarizations. And so for me at least, right, even though sometimes I get ignored and sometimes I get a nasty response back,
Eat glass.
that is worth the cost of the occasional really edifying conversation that I have. Let me be clear, right? I'm not saying you should do this all the time. It's not for everyone. If you're feeling frazzled or exhausted or traumatized, I'm not saying start a conversation with a nasty person who disagrees with you. But lots of times we are in a space to do that, and it really can be a very specific way that you can learn and reduce polarization. Fourth piece of advice. This may sound really basic, but it's really important. Just avoid adding fuel to the fire. You know, there is this phrase that most of us learn in elementary school, which is if you have nothing good to say about someone, don't say anything. That really applies in the social media landscape. So when we're emotionally aroused, when we are mad, when we're filled with anger or righteous indignation, we want to do something now. And you know what's the easiest thing to do? It's to hit retweet or share. I mean, I have done this when I want to express my outrage or to show solidarity with a specific cause. But here's the thing, when we do that, we, not social media, but we are the ones who are contributing to the polarization. My advice on this, right, is just to take a step back, to breathe, to kind of name the feeling and resist the urge to fuel the fire.
Good luck, though.
Matthew Lieberman, who is a noted social psychologist at UCLA, has talked about this concept that he calls affective labeling. So the idea here is that when we actually name the feelings we're having, it mitigates or shortens the negative emotional reactivity. It allows the frontal lobe, which does our reasoning and our thinking, to overtake the emotional reaction that comes from our amygdala. So, as much as possible, avoid tweeting or posting when you're in that negative emotional state. Last, fifth, consider getting involved in efforts that promote dialogue and promote discussion and reduce polarization. So, for those of you who are really, really keen, right, this is like the diehards, like you care a lot about reducing the problem of social media and polarization, there are a bunch of organizations that are seeking to fight this. One of them is the National Institute for Civil Discourse. I'm actually a senior advisor there, but there's others like Listen First or Braver Angels or Living Room Conversations, and all of those have strategies to bring more dialogue and more listening to the world of social media. Social media is a gift, it's not a bane, but it has also attracted dangerous polarization and partisanship. But the good news is, right, we can each make a difference. So do what you can to make social media a place of fun and learning and dialogue and connection. If you want to learn more about political polarization, check out my video, How Does Political Polarization Lead to Gridlock in Congress? And of course, please like, hit the bell, and subscribe. If you want to learn more about how to have these difficult conversations, look at the Cambridge Negotiation Institute, where I actually teach courses on this, or check me out at bobbordone.com. Thanks for hanging out with me, and let's keep negotiating together. Here's that video on political polarization. It's a great way to make sure social media doesn't contribute to polarization. Keep watching.